The glass walls of the conference room seemed to trap the heat inside, making the air feel thick and heavy. I sat at the far end of the polished oak table, my hands clasped tightly together to stop them from shaking. Across from me sat the executives from Silverline Corp., our biggest potential client in years. Mr. Vance, their CEO, looked expectant, his pen poised over a notepad. Beside him, his team looked equally serious. This deal was worth millions, and I was the lead architect who had designed the entire software proposal. Next to me sat Mrs. Gable, my boss. She was tapping her fingers aggressively on the table, a nervous tic she always had before she lashed out. She was wearing her usual sharp, dark suit, and her face was tight with stress. She hadn't slept well, and unfortunately, that meant none of us were allowed to be happy either. We were 10 minutes into the presentation. I had just finished explaining the back-end security protocols, a complex system I had spent 6 months building on my own time. I felt proud. The numbers were solid and the system was bulletproof. And that, I said, clicking to the next slide, is how we ensure zero data loss. I looked at Mrs. Gable for approval. Instead, I saw her eyes narrow. The air in the room suddenly felt much colder. She cleared her throat loudly, interrupting the flow, and the sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Mrs. Gable stood up slowly, blocking the screen with her body. She turned to the clients with a strained, fake smile, then pivoted to glare down at me. "I have to apologize to everyone here," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It seems my lead developer has presented you with a rough draft rather than the final product." My stomach dropped. This wasn't a rough draft. This was the final, polished version she had approved yesterday. "I asked for innovation," she continued, her voice rising so everyone could hear clearly. "I asked for something groundbreaking. Instead, Mabel here has given us lazy, basic coding that an intern could have produced." I opened my mouth to speak, to defend myself, but she cut me off with a sharp hand gesture. The humiliation burned my cheeks. Mr. Vance looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. He knew the work was good. He had been nodding along the whole time. Mrs. Gable wasn't done. She needed a scapegoat for her own nerves. She leaned in close to me but spoke loud enough for the back of the room to hear. "Honestly, looking at this garbage, I don't know why I pay you. You bring no value to this team. In front of these clients, I have to say it, you are utterly worthless." The word hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Worthless. After 5 years of loyalty, that was my reward. The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the projector fan and the distant traffic outside. My coworkers, Tim and Jessica, stared at their laps, terrified to make eye contact. They knew that if they defended me, they would be next. Mr. Vance looked at me with pity, which was almost worse than Mrs. Gable's anger. I sat there, the word worthless bouncing around my skull. I thought about the weekends I worked for free. I thought about the family dinners I missed to fix her emergencies. Suddenly, the fear vanished. It was replaced by a strange, cold clarity. It was as if a heavy chain had just snapped off my chest. I realized I didn't have to take this. I didn't have to sit here and be abused by someone who didn't know how to open a PDF without help. My heart rate slowed down. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale office air one last time. I looked up at Mrs. Gable. She was waiting for me to beg, to apologize, to scramble to fix it. That was our dynamic. She broke me and I fixed myself, but not today. Slowly, deliberately, the corners of my mouth turned up. I smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was a genuine, peaceful smile of someone who just realized they were free. "Why are you smiling?" Mrs. Gable snapped, confused by my reaction. "Did you hear me? I said this work is worthless." She expected tears or anger. My calm was throwing her off balance. "I heard you perfectly," I said, my voice steady and clear. I stood up, pushing my chair back. "And I agree with you, Mrs. Gable. You shouldn't pay for worthless work." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my ID badge and the heavy brass key to the server room. I placed them gently on the table. They made a soft clink sound that felt like a gavel banging in a courtroom. "I resign," I said, effective immediately. Mrs. Gable scoffed, crossing her arms. "Don't be dramatic, Mabel. Sit down, we have a meeting to finish." She didn't believe me. She thought she owned me. "No, you have a meeting to finish," I corrected her. I turned to the clients. "Mr. Vance, it was a pleasure. I wish you luck with Apex Systems. You're going to need it." I grabbed my personal notebook, turned my back on my boss, and walked toward the door. "You can't just walk out," Mrs. Gable shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "If you walk out that door, you are finished in this industry." "I'll take my chances," I said, and I pushed the door open, stepping out into the hallway. Walking back to my desk felt like floating. The usual office noise, phones ringing, typing, chatter sounded distant. I reached my cubicle and didn't bother packing everything. I just took the picture of my parents, my favorite cactus, and my external hard drive that contained my personal portfolio. I left the company laptop. I left the piles of paperwork. I left the stress. Tim, who had slipped out of the meeting after me, ran up to my desk. "Mabel, are you crazy?" he whispered, eyes wide with panic. "She's going to destroy you. You know how vindictive she is." "Let her try," I said, putting on my coat. "I'm done, Tim. I can't do it anymore." "But what about the encryption keys?" Tim asked, his voice trembling. "You're the only one who knows the admin passwords for the Silverline project. If you leave, no one can access the core code." I paused. He was right. I had built the security architecture so well that it required my unique biometric login and a password string only I knew to make changes. "I'm sure Mrs. Gable can figure it out," I said with a dry chuckle. "After all, she said my work was worthless. Why would she want to access worthless code?" I patted Tim on the shoulder. "Good luck, buddy." I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and never looked back. The first hour of freedom was strange. I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching the building I had spent 5 years of my life in. I expected to feel panic about rent, bills, and the future. Instead, I felt a rush of adrenaline. I drove to a diner nearby and ordered a massive lunch. I turned my phone off. I knew it would be exploding with calls, and I didn't want to hear Mrs. Gable's screeching voice. For the first time in years, I tasted my food. I watched people walking by outside and realized I was one of them now, a free person. But deep down, I knew the war wasn't over. Mrs. Gable was a bully, and bullies don't let their victims walk away easily. She would try to hurt me. She would try to sue me. I went home and finally turned my phone on at 6:00 p.m. The notifications flooded in like a tidal wave. 14 missed calls from the office, 6 voicemails, 20 text messages. Most were from Mrs. Gable, ranging from "get back here now" to "we can talk about a raise." The last one, sent 10 minutes ago, simply said, "Give me the PASSWORDS or I will call the police." I laughed out loud in my quiet living room. She was desperate. The realization had finally hit her. She had locked herself out of her own biggest project. I didn't reply. I let her stew in her own panic. The next morning, I woke up without an alarm clock. It was a Wednesday, and usually I would be rushing to catch the train, stressed about the morning briefing. Today, I made coffee slowly and sat on my balcony. Around 10:00 a.m., my phone rang again. It wasn't the office number. It was a private number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello, this is Mabel." "Mabel, this is James Vance, from Silverline." I sat up straighter. "Mr. Vance, I apologize for the scene yesterday. It was unprofessional." "The only unprofessional person in that room was Mrs. Gable," Vance said, his voice calm and authoritative. "Look, I'm going to be direct. We pulled the contract from Apex this morning." My heart skipped a beat. "You did?" "Yes, we can't trust a company that treats its key talent like that. Plus, they admitted they can't even access the demo you built because you're the only admin. It showed us how fragile their operation is." He paused. "We want that software, Mabel, but we don't want Apex. We want you." I was stunned. "Me? I'm just one person, Mr. Vance." "You're the person who built the engine," he replied. "Create your own consultancy. Invoice us directly. We'll pay you the full contract fee that we were going to pay Apex. And since there's no overhead, you'll be making about 5 times your old salary." The next week was a blur of activity, but it was the good kind of busy. I registered my own business, Mabel Tech Solutions. I hired a lawyer to look over the contract Mr. Vance sent me. It was ironclad. The money was staggering. I was going to make more in this one project than I had made in the last 3 years combined. I set up a home office, bought a powerful new computer, and started rebuilding the Silverline project from my original notes. since the intellectual property clause in my old contract had a loophole regarding hostile work environments, something my lawyer found with glee. I was in the clear to use my own concepts. Meanwhile, I heard from Tim that Apex was in chaos. Mrs. Gable was blaming everyone but herself. She had hired 2 expensive external IT firms to try and crack my old password on the server, but they failed. The system was doing exactly what I designed it to do, keeping unauthorized users out. She was telling the board of directors that I had sabotaged the system. She was lying to cover her tracks. She didn't tell them that the client had already left. She was trying to buy time, praying she could fix it before the quarterly earnings call. But time was the one thing she didn't have. 2 weeks after I quit, a courier arrived at my door with a thick envelope. It was a cease and desist letter from Apex's legal department. They were threatening to sue me for theft of company property and breach of fiduciary duty. They demanded I return all data and pay for the damages caused by my resignation. I felt a spike of fear. Mrs. Gable was playing dirty. She wanted to bury me in legal fees so I would collapse. I called Mr. Vance to give him a heads up. "Don't worry, Mabel," Vance said, sounding amused. "She sent us a letter too, threatening to sue us for breaking the contract. She's flailing. I have a team of lawyers who are very bored and very aggressive. I'll have them handle your defense as part of our partnership." The relief was overwhelming. "Thank you, Mr. Vance." "Call me James," he said, "and get back to work. We have a deadline." My lawyer fired back a response to Apex. We attached the timestamps showing that I had created the core code on my personal computer before the project officially started at Apex. We also included a transcript of Mrs. Gable calling the work worthless in front of witnesses. The letter essentially said, "If the work is worthless, why are you suing to get it back?" The legal threat stopped instantly. It was silence after that. A month passed. My business was thriving. I delivered the first phase of the software to Silverline, and they were ecstatic. James Vance referred me to 2 other CEOs, and suddenly I had more work than I could handle alone. I needed help. I called Tim. "Hey, how are things at the Titanic?" I asked. Tim sighed heavily. "It's bad, Mabel. She fired Jessica yesterday because the coffee machine was broken. Everyone is looking for new jobs. The stock price dropped 15% after the Silverline deal fell through publicly." "Quit," I said. "Come work for me. I can match your salary plus a bonus, and I promise never to call you worthless." There was a silence on the line, then a shaky laugh. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow," I said. Having Tim on board changed everything. We worked out of my living room at first, then rented a small office space downtown. It was modest, but it was ours. We had music playing, we took breaks when we needed to, and the quality of our work skyrocketed. We were building something real. Meanwhile, Apex was crumbling. Rumors were flying that the board was investigating Mrs. Gable for misconduct. She was fighting for her life, and I knew she would try one last desperate move. The annual Tech Innovators Summit was coming up. This was the biggest event of the year, where all the major tech companies showcased their new products. Apex had reserved the biggest booth in the center of the hall months ago. It was supposed to be Mrs. Gable's moment of glory, where she would unveil the Silverline project. Now she had nothing to show, but she couldn't cancel without admitting defeat. I, on the other hand, was attending as a guest of Silverline. James Vance wanted me to present the software at his booth. It was going to be my public debut. I was nervous. I bought a new suit, one that actually fit. I practiced my speech. Tim helped me set up the demo. "She's going to be there," Tim warned me as we packed the equipment. "I know," I said, tightening my scarf. "I'm counting on it." The day of the summit arrived. The convention center was packed with bright lights and thousands of people. I walked in with James Vance, feeling like an imposter, but he kept introducing me as the genius architect. We walked past the Apex booth. It was huge and flashy, but empty. There were no DMOS running, just looping videos of stock footage. Mrs. Gable was standing there, looking thin and frantic, trying to pull people in to talk. When Mrs. Gable saw me, she froze. Her eyes scanned my new suit, the badge that said CEO Mabel Tech, and the confident way I was walking next to her ex-client. She excused herself from the confused person she was talking to and marched straight toward us. "Mabel," she said, her voice tight, "and Mr. Vance." "Mrs. Gable," I nodded politely. "Nice booth, a bit quiet though." She ignored the jab. "We need to talk privately." She tried to grab my arm, but I stepped back. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of my client," I said. She lowered her voice, her eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. "This has gone on long enough. You've made your point. The board is breathing down my neck. I am willing to rehire you. Senior VP position, double your old salary. We merge your little startup back into Apex, and we pretend this never happened." She truly didn't get it. She thought everything had a price tag. She thought she could buy back my dignity. "I'm not interested," I said. "You are making a mistake," she hissed. "You are a small fish. Apex is a shark. We will eat you alive. You might have one client, but we have the market." "Actually," James Vance interrupted, "she has 3 clients, and she didn't steal them. They came to her because they heard Apex was losing its touch." Mrs. Gable's face turned a blotchy red. "You ungrateful," she started, but stopped herself as a group of investors walked by. She forced a smile until they passed, then glared back at me. "You think you've won? This industry is small. I will ruin your reputation. I will tell everyone you are difficult, that you steal data, that you are unstable." "Go ahead," I said, my voice calm. "But be careful. My lawyer is very eager to file a defamation suit. And unlike you, I have the timestamps and the emails to prove who the unstable one is." She stared at me with pure hate, but also fear. For the first time, she realized I wasn't afraid of her anymore. The power dynamic had completely flipped. "I built that department," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I gave you a career." "No," I said softly. "You gave me a paycheck. I built the career. And then you tried to destroy it. Excuse us, Mrs. Gable. We have a presentation to give." I walked away, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the aisle. I felt a heavy weight lift off my shoulders. I had finally stood up to the monster under my bed, and she turned out to be just a sad, angry woman. The presentation went perfectly. The software performed flawlessly. The audience was impressed, asking questions, taking notes. By the end of the hour, I had a stack of business cards from potential clients. I was buzzing with excitement. As I was packing up, I checked the news on my phone. There was a breaking story on a tech blog. Apex Systems stock plummets amidst rumors of leadership crisis. The article detailed how Apex had failed to deliver on key promises at the summit. It mentioned that their booth was empty and that their CEO appeared agitated. The market was reacting. Investors were pulling out. I looked across the hall. The Apex booth was being dismantled early. Mrs. Gable was nowhere to be seen. That evening, James invited Tim and me to a celebratory dinner. We toasted to the future. "To worthless work," Tim joked, raising his glass. "To realizing mistakes," I added, clinking my glass against his. But the story wasn't quite over. Mrs. Gable wasn't the type to go down quietly. She had one card left to play, or so she thought. She knew where I lived. 2 days later, on a rainy Tuesday evening, my buzzer rang. I checked the intercom camera. It was her. She was standing outside my apartment building, soaking wet, no umbrella. She looked nothing like the powerful executive she used to be. I debated not letting her in. I had no obligation to talk to her. But curiosity and perhaps a bit of pity got the best of me. I buzzed her in. She came up to my floor. I opened the door but didn't invite her inside. She stood in the hallway, dripping water onto the carpet. Her eyes were red and puffy. "They fired me," she said. No hello, no preamble, just the raw truth. "I heard," I said. The news had broken that morning. The board had removed her effectively immediately for gross negligence. "I lost everything," she said, her voice trembling. "My stock options, my reputation, my pension is tied up in litigation. They are blaming me for everything." "You were the boss," I said gently. "That's how it works. You take the credit, you take the blame." "I need you to help me," she said, looking up at me with desperation. Please, tell the board that the code was faulty. Tell them it was a technical glitch, not a management failure. If you write a statement saying it was a collaborative failure, they might let me keep my severance package." I stared at her, unable to believe the audacity. She wanted me to lie. She wanted me to damage my own professional reputation, to say my code was bad, just to save her retirement fund. "You want me to say my work is worthless?" I asked. She flinched at the word. "Please, Mabel, I have a mortgage, I have kids in college, I'm begging you." I thought about the years of abuse, the late nights, the way she stole my ideas, the way she made me feel small so she could feel big. "I can't do that, Patricia," I said, using her first name for the first time. "I can't lie for you. The code works. The failure was that you didn't value the people who built it." She slumped against the doorframe. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "I shouldn't have said what I said." "Yes, you did," I said. "But an apology doesn't fix the past 5 years. And it doesn't fix the fact that you are only here because you need money, not because you are sorry." She looked at me, and the anger flared up one last time. "You heartless little." "Goodbye, Mrs. Gable," I said, and I gently closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I heard her crying in the hallway for a minute, and then the sound of the elevator arriving. She was gone. The next few months were a period of rapid growth. With Mrs. Gable gone, Apex Systems went into a freefall. The new interim CEO tried to stabilize the ship, but the talent drain was too severe. Everyone who was good had left, and many of them had come to me. I hired 3 more developers from my old team. We had to move to a bigger office again. We were winning awards. Mabel Tech was becoming a serious player in the market. One afternoon, I received a call from the chairman of the board at Apex. I expected a lawsuit. Instead, I got a proposition. "Ms. Mabel," he said, "we are liquidating the software division. We can't run it. We don't have the DNA anymore. We want to know if you're interested in buying the assets." "The assets?" I asked. "The servers, the old client list, the patents, and the office building," he said. "We are selling it for pennies on the dollar. We just want to stop the bleeding." It was poetic justice. The company that called me worthless was now asking me to buy them out. I ran the numbers with Tim. It was a steal. We could expand our operations overnight. We would own the building where we used to be treated like dirt. "Let's do it," I told Tim. The signing ceremony was surreal. I sat in the same conference room where I had resigned. The table was the same. The glass walls were the same. But this time, I sat at the head of the table. The Apex executives were the ones shaking, hoping I would sign the check. I signed the papers. I owned Apex's software division. The first thing I did was change the locks. The second thing I did was call a meeting of the remaining staff, the ones who hadn't been able to leave. They looked terrified, expecting mass layoffs. I stood up. "Hi, everyone," I said. "I know most of you. I know you've been working in a toxic environment. That ends today. No more yelling. No more impossible demands. We are going to build great things, and we are going to go home at 5 p.m. There was a stunned silence, and then slowly applause broke out. It wasn't polite applause, it was relief. I walked back to my new office, Mrs. Gable's old office. It felt too big, too cold. "Tim," I yelled, "get the maintenance guys to take down these curtains. I want some sunlight in here." Life settled into a new rhythm. I was the boss now, but I tried every day to be the opposite of Mrs. Gable. I listened. I said thank you. I gave credit where it was due, and the business flourished. We were profitable, happy, and growing. One autumn afternoon, about a year after the resignation, I was walking to a coffee shop near our building. I saw a woman sitting on a park bench, feeding pigeons. She wore a simple coat and her hair was graying. It was Mrs. Gable. She looked peaceful but sad. She wasn't checking a phone or shouting at anyone. She was just watching the birds. I hesitated. I could walk past her. She wouldn't see me. But something made me stop. I walked over to the bench. "Mind if I sit?" I asked. She looked up, startled. Recognition flashed in her eyes, followed by shame. She shifted to make room. "It's a free country," she muttered. I sat down. We watched the pigeons for a moment in silence. "I hear you're doing well," she said, not looking at me. "I saw the article in Forbes." "We're doing okay," I said. "How are you?" "I'm managing," she said. "I'm consulting a bit, small firms, teaching them management." She laughed bitterly. "Irony, right? Me teaching management." "You have experience," I said diplomatically. She sighed. "I was angry back then, Mabel. I was under so much pressure from the shareholders. I thought if I squeezed you all harder, I'd get diamonds. Instead, I just crushed everything." It was the first real admission of guilt I had ever heard from her. "You pushed us too far," I said. "People aren't machines. You can't optimize them by shouting." "I know that now," she said softly. "I lost my career to learn that lesson. It was an expensive lesson." She turned to look at me. "I never said sorry, not really. I just asked for favors, but I see now how wrong I was." She took a breath. "I am sorry, Mabel. You were the best engineer I had. I was just too threatened by your talent to let you shine." I looked at her. The anger I had held onto for so long finally evaporated completely. She wasn't a monster. She was just a person who had failed. "Thank you, Patricia," I said. "I appreciate that." We sat there for a few more minutes. The dynamic was gone. We were just two people on a bench. "Are you hearing?" she asked, half joking, half serious. I smiled. "I don't think that would be a good idea. The team, they remember." She nodded. "Fair enough, I wouldn't hire me either." I stood up. "I have to get back, we have a launch today." "Go get them," she said. I walked away. I didn't look back this time either, but for a different reason. I wasn't running away from the past anymore. I was just walking toward my future. I returned to the office. The lobby was bustling with energy. The sign on the wall said Vortex Innovations, my new name for the merged company. I took the elevator up. Tim was waiting for me. "Where were you? The beta test is starting," Tim said. "Just feeding the birds," I smiled. The beta test was a massive success. We celebrated with pizza and cheap soda, just like the old days, but in a boardroom that cost more than my parents' house. I looked around at the faces of my team. They were tired but happy. They were laughing. I realized then what true success was. It wasn't the money, though the money was nice. It wasn't the title. It was the ability to create an environment where people didn't feel worthless. I went to the window and looked out at the city skyline. I thought about that moment in the conference room. It felt like a lifetime ago. If Mrs. Gable hadn't insulted me, I might still be sitting in that cubicle, miserable, waiting for a 2% raise. In a strange way, her cruelty was the catalyst for my freedom. She had pushed me off the cliff, and I had been forced to learn how to fly. Years passed. Vortex became a global leader. I eventually stepped down as CEO to focus on R&D, letting Tim take the helm. I wanted to get back to coding, back to building things. I started a scholarship fund for young female developers who had been fired or mistreated in corporate jobs. I called it the Second Chance Initiative. One day I received a letter. It was handwritten. "Dear Mabel, I read about your scholarship. I think it's a wonderful thing. Enclosed is a donation. It's not much, but it's from my first paycheck at my new job. I'm working as a library administrator now. It's quiet. People are nice. Best, Patricia." Inside the envelope was a check for $50. I stared at it for a long time. It was probably the most meaningful money I had ever received. I framed the check and put it on my desk, right next to the photo of my parents. It served as a reminder that people can change, even if it takes hitting rock bottom, and a reminder that no one is truly worthless. I looked at the young intern sitting across from me. She was struggling with a line of code, looking frustrated and scared, probably worried I would yell at her. I stood up and walked over to her. She flinched slightly. "Hey," I said softly, "you're stuck on the loop function." "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I'm stupid, I can't get it." "You're not stupid," I said, pulling up a chair. "And you're definitely not worthless. This stuff is hard. Let me show you a trick I learned the hard way." I sat there with her for an hour, guiding her until the code worked. When it finally compiled, her face lit up with pure joy. "Thanks, Mabel," she beamed. "Anytime," I said. As I left the office that night, the janitor was mopping the floor. "Good night, Ms. Mabel," he called out. "Good night, Sam," I waved. I walked out into the cool night air. I took a deep breath. I had one. Not because I destroyed my enemy, but because I hadn't become her. I had broken the cycle. I got into my car and drove home, the city lights blurring past me. I thought about the title of my life story. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about resilience. The smile that had started in that conference room all those years ago was still there. It was etched into my soul. The smile of a woman who knew her own worth and who would never, ever let anyone take it away again.